Okay, guys, we're going to go ahead and read the next 6 chapters of Sideways Stories from Wayside School. We're going to start with chapter 13, Rondi. Rondi had 22 beautiful teeth. Everyone else had 24. Rondi was missing her 2 front teeth, and those were the most beautiful teeth of all. "Your front teeth are so cute," said Mrs. Jules. "They make you look just adorable." "But Mrs. Jules," said Rondi, "I don't have any front teeth." "I know," said Mrs. Jules. "That's what makes them so cute." Rondi didn't understand. "Ooh, Rondi, I just love your 2 front teeth," said Mauricia. "I wish I had some like that." "But I don't have them," said Rondi. "That's why I love them so much," said Mauricia. "Oh, this is silly," said Rondi. "Everybody thinks the teeth I don't have are cute." "I'm not wearing a coat. Don't you all just love my coat? And what about my 3rd arm? I don't have one. Isn't it lovely?" "Love your hat, Rondi," said Joy. "I'm not wearing a hat," Rondi screamed. "That's what makes it so interesting," said Joy. "Don't you think so, Leslie?" "Oh, yes," said Leslie. "It's a very nice hat. Nice boots, too." "I'm not wearing boots," Rondi insisted. "Yes," said Joy, "very nice boots. They go so well with your hat." "What hat?" asked Rondi. "Yes," Leslie agreed. "Rondi showed excellent taste by not wearing the hat or the boots. They go so well together." Rondi had had enough. She covered her head so nobody could see her hat. She put her feet under her desk so nobody could see her boots. Then she closed her mouth tightly so nobody could see her 2 front teeth. Suddenly, everybody who was sitting near her began to laugh. "What's so funny?" asked Todd. "The joke Rondi didn't tell," said Jason. "Ask Rondi not to tell it again, Todd," said Calvin. "Rondi," said Todd, "don't tell it again." Rondi was horrified. She just didn't know what to do. She kept her mouth shut and just stared at Todd. To her amazement, Todd laughed. "Hey, everybody," called Todd. "Listen to Rondi's joke." Rondi didn't say a word, but the rest of the class began to laugh. Mrs. Jules got very angry. She wrote Rondi's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. "The classroom is not the place for jokes," she said. "But Mrs. Jules," said Rondi, "I didn't tell a joke." "Yes, I know," said Mrs. Jules, "but the funniest jokes are the ones that remain untold." Okay, said Rondi. "If that's what you want, then that's what you'll get. I'll really tell a joke. That way I won't disturb the class. And tomorrow I'll wear boots and a hat. Of course, you won't like them as much as the ones I didn't wear today, but I better hurry up and tell my joke before you all start to laugh." There was a monkey sitting in a banana tree. He was very hungry. He knew that somewhere in the tree there was a magic banana, and that once he ate that banana, he wouldn't be hungry anymore. He ate 1 banana. That wasn't it. He was still hungry. He ate another banana. That wasn't it either. He was still hungry. Finally, after he ate his 10th banana, he wasn't hungry anymore. "I knew I'd find it," he said. "It's too bad I didn't eat that one first. I wouldn't have had to waste all those other bananas." Nobody laughed. Nobody had even listened to Rondi. Mrs. Jules was busy teaching arithmetic, and everybody else was paying strict attention. Rondi slapped herself in the face to make sure she was really there. She was. The bell rang for recess. Rondi ran outside. She was very upset. Louis, the yard teacher, saw her. "Why the frown, Rondi?" he asked. "Come on, smile. Let me see your cute front teeth." Rondi screamed. She socked Louis in the stomach and then bit his arm with her missing teeth. And that kind of bite hurts the worst. Chapter 14, Sammy. It was a horrible, stinky, rainy day. Some rainy days are fun and exciting, but not this one. This one stunk. All the children were wet and wore smelly raincoats. The whole room smelled awful. "Oh, it stinks in here," said Mauricia. Everybody laughed, but she was right. There was one good thing, however. There was a new boy in class. New kids are always fun. Except no one could even tell what the new boy looked like. He was completely covered by his raincoat. "Class," said Mrs. Jules, "I'd like you all to meet Sammy. Let's show him what a nice class we can be." Leslie walked up and smiled at Sammy. but her smile quickly turned into a frown. "You smell terrible," she said. "Leslie!" exclaimed Mrs. Jules. "That's no way to greet a new member of our class." Mrs. Jules wrote Leslie's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. "But he does, Mrs. Jules," said Leslie. "He smells awful." "You're ugly," Sammy replied. "Now, Sammy, that's no way to talk," said Mrs. Jules. "Leslie's a very pretty girl." "She's ugly," said Sammy. Allison spoke up. "Well, you smell terrible and are probably even uglier, but nobody can see you because you're hiding under that smelly old raincoat." "That will be enough of that," said Mrs. Jules. "Now, Sammy, why don't you take off your coat and hang it in the closet? Let's all see how nice you look." "I don't want to, you old windbag," said Sammy. "That's because he's so ugly," said Leslie. "I'm sure he's quite handsome," said Mrs. Jules. "He's just shy. Here, let me help you." Mrs. Jules took off Sammy's coat for him, but underneath it was still another raincoat, even dirtier and smellier than the first one. They still couldn't see his face. "Ew, now he smells even worse," said Mauricia. "You don't exactly smell like a rose either," Sammy replied. Mrs. Jules took off his second raincoat, but there was still another one under that. And the smell became so bad that Mrs. Jules had to run and stick her head out the window to get some fresh air. "You're all a bunch of pigs," Sammy screeched. "Dirty, rotten pigs!" The smell was overpowering. Sammy just stood there, hidden under his raincoats. Mrs. Jules wrote Sammy's name under the word discipline. "Send him home on the kindergarten bus," said Joy. "Not with me," said Todd. Mrs. Jules held her nose, walked up to Sammy, and removed his raincoat. She threw it out the window, but he still had on another one. Sammy hissed, "Hey, you old windbag, watch where you throw my good clothes." Mrs. Jules put a check next to Sammy's name on the blackboard. Then she took off another raincoat and threw it out the window. The smell got worse, for he had on still another one. Sammy began to laugh. His horrible laugh was even worse than his horrible voice. When Sammy first came into the room, he was 4 feet tall. But after Mrs. Jules removed 6 of his raincoats, he was only 3 feet tall, and there were still more raincoats to go. Mrs. Jules circled his name and removed another coat. She threw it out the window. Then she put a triangle around the circle and threw another one of his coats outside. She kept doing this until Sammy was only 1.5 feet high. With every coat she took off, Sammy's laugh got louder and the smell got worse. Some of the children held their ears. Others could hold only one ear because they were holding their nose with the other hand. It was hard to say which was worse, the laugh or the smell. Sammy stopped laughing and said, "Hey, old windbag, if you take off one more of my coats and throw it out the window, I'll bite your head off." "They smell too bad for me to allow them in my classroom," said Mrs. Jules. "You can pick them up when you leave." "They smell better than you do, pighead," Sammy shouted. Mrs. Jules didn't stop. She took off another one of his coats, then another and another. Sammy was only 4 inches tall, 3 inches tall, 2 inches tall. At last, she removed the final coat. All that was there was a dead rat. "Well, I don't allow dead rats in my classroom," said Mrs. Jules. She picked it up by the tail, put it in a plastic bag, and threw it away. Mrs. Jules didn't allow dead rats in her class. Todd once brought in a dead rat for show and tell, and Mrs. Jules made him throw that one away too. "I'm glad Sammy isn't allowed in our classroom," said Rondi. "I didn't like him very much." "Yes," said Mrs. Jules, "we caught another one." Dead rats were always trying to sneak into Mrs. Jules' class. That was the 3rd one she'd caught since September. Chapter 15, Dee Dee. This story contains a problem and a solution. Dee Dee was a mousy-looking kid. Unlike most children at Wayside School, she liked recess better than spelling. As soon as the recess bell rang, she would jump up from her seat and run out the door. There were big signs in Wayside School on every floor, "No jumping down the stairs." Dee Dee never seemed to notice the signs. She jumped down the stairs. Some children took the stairs 2 at a time. Dee Dee took them 10 at a time. That was on the way down. It was funny, she never seemed to be in quite the same hurry on the way back up. There was another sign at Wayside School, "No cutting across the grass." Dee Dee must not have seen that one either. She cut across the grass and ran up to Louis, the yard teacher. "I want a green ball," Dee Dee said. The green balls were the best. "I'm all out of green balls," said Louis. "Okay, then I want a red ball," said Dee Dee. The red balls were just about as good as the green balls. They didn't bounce as high, but actually sometimes you don't want a ball to bounce too high. "I'm all out of red balls too," said Louis. "Do you have anything left?" asked Dee Dee. Dee Dee meant anything besides the yellow ball. There was one yellow ball at Wayside School, and Louis was always trying to get rid of it. It didn't bounce, and it never went the way it was kicked. "Anything at all?" asked Dee Dee. "Today's your lucky day," said Louis. "I have one ball left, just for you. The one and only yellow ball." "No thanks," said Dee Dee. "Aw, come on, take it," said Louis. "Why don't you ever have any green or red balls?" asked Dee Dee. "I do," said Louis. "But the other children ask first. By the time you get here, they're all gone." "But that's because I had to come all the way from the 30th story. How do you expect me to compete with the kids from the first or second?" she asked. "That's why I saved you the yellow ball," said Louis. "Everybody wanted it, but I saved it just for you." "I bet," said Dee Dee. She took the yellow ball and bounced it on the ground. It stopped dead with a thud. She stepped back, ran up, and kicked it. It went backwards over her head. She didn't bother chasing it. Instead, she played hopscotch with Jenny and Leslie. She thought it was disgusting. The next day, Dee Dee asked Mrs. Jules if she could go to recess early. "Why?" asked Mrs. Jules. "So I can get a green ball before Louis gives them all away," said Dee Dee. "I'm glad you have a good reason," said Mrs. Jules. "Yes, you may go, but first, spell Mississippi for me." Spelling was not Dee Dee's best subject. By the time she finally got it right, she was 5 minutes late for recess. She jumped down the stairs, cut across the grass, and ran up to Louis. There were no green balls left. There were no red balls left either. However, there was still the yellow ball. Dee Dee played jump rope with Joy and Mauricia. It was no better than hopscotch. So Dee Dee's problem was to figure out a way to get a green ball, or at least a red ball. You already know that this story also contains a solution. Dee Dee figured it out. See if you can too. Remember everything you know about Dee Dee, Wayside School, and Mrs. Jules. Hint: the next day, Dee Dee brought a cream cheese and jelly sandwich, some nuts, and shredded cheese in her lunchbox. Here's what happened. Just before recess, Dee Dee smeared the cream cheese and jelly all over her face. Then she stuffed her mouth with nuts and hung the shredded cheese from her nose. When she closed her eyes, she looked just like a dead rat. Todd was in on the plan. "Mrs. Jules," he called, "there's a dead rat in the classroom." Mrs. Jules was very put out. "I want that dead rat out immediately." When Mrs. Jules said immediately, she meant it. Dee Dee instantly found herself outside on the playground. "I want a green ball," she said. Louis pretended he hadn't heard her. "May I please have a green ball?" asked Dee Dee. Louis gave her a green ball. "I don't know how you did it, Dee Dee, but you're first today," he said. When Mrs. Jules found out that Dee Dee and Todd had tricked her, she sent Todd home early on the kindergarten bus. Dee Dee threw the green ball on the ground. It bounced 50 feet straight up in the air, and then she caught it. "You don't like me, do you?" she asked Louis. "Sure I do," said Louis. "No, you don't," said Dee Dee. "Yes, I like you," said Louis. "No, you don't," Dee Dee insisted. "Yes, I like you, I really do," said Louis. "Are you sure?" asked Dee Dee. "Yes," said Louis. "Don't you believe me?" "I guess so," said Dee Dee. "Do you like me?" asked Louis. "You bet," said Dee Dee. "You're my best friend." "Terrific," said Louis. "I always wanted to be best friends with a dead rat." Chapter 16, DJ. DJ skipped up the 30 flights of stairs to Mrs. Jules' room. He was grinning from ear to ear, from nose to chin, from here to there and back again. "Hey, DJ," Todd shouted. "Glad to see you." Todd was a pushover for smiling faces. Mrs. Jules heard him. She began to write Todd's name on the blackboard under discipline, but when she saw DJ smile, she put down the chalk. "Good morning, DJ," she said. "What are you so happy about?" DJ grinned and shrugged his shoulders. Mrs. Jules smiled. Damien looked at the smile on Mrs. Jewls' face, then at Todd's, and finally at DJ's. Then Damien smiled too. His smile was almost as big as DJ's. They were best friends. Once they saw the two of them smiling, the rest of the class couldn't help but smile. Rhonda had a very cute one, due to her missing 2 front teeth. Nobody had an ugly smile. Jason came to school late. He was very upset. But the first thing he saw was Damien's smile, and he felt a little bit better. Then he saw Rondi's toothless grin, and he even began to smile a little himself. But when he saw the piano on DJ's face, he fell laughing onto the floor. Everybody started to laugh, even Kathy, and she hardly ever laughed except when someone hurt himself. The whole room seemed to be laughing, not just the people in it. The blackboard chuckled, the ceiling snickered, the desks were jumping up and down, and the chairs were slapping one another on the back. The floor was very ticklish. It laughed until the walls turned purple. The waste paper basket began to sing, and all the pencils stood up and danced. Finally, things began to settle down. Mrs. Jewls wiped her eyes and said, "DJ, why don't you tell the class why you're so happy? At least let us know what you're laughing about." But DJ just kept on smiling. "Aw, come on, DJ," said Dee Dee. "Tell us." DJ didn't say a word. He couldn't. His mouth was stretched out of shape. "Let us guess," said Ron. "If we're right, will you tell us?" DJ nodded his head. His smile began to hurt his ears. Everyone took one guess. "Have you been swimming? Is it your birthday? Are you in love? Did you get a green ball?" Nobody guessed right. At recess, DJ was still smiling. Lewis, the yard teacher, called, "Hey, DJ, come here." They walked to the far corner of the playground where they were alone. "What's up, DJ?" Lewis asked. DJ just smiled. "Come on, DJ, you can tell me. Why are you so happy?" DJ looked up at him. He said, "You need a reason to be sad. You don't need a reason to be happy." Chapter 17. John. John had light brown hair and a round head. He was Joe's best friend. John was one of the smartest boys in Mrs. Jewls' class, but he had one problem. He could only read words written upside down. Nobody ever wrote anything upside down. But it was only a little problem. John was still in the high reading group. He just turned his book upside down. It was easier for John to turn his book upside down than to learn to read correctly. But the easiest way isn't always the best way. Mrs. Jewls said, "John, you can't go on reading like this. You can't spend the rest of your life turning your books upside down." "Why not?" asked John. "Because I said so," said Mrs. Jewls. "Besides, what happens when I write something on the blackboard? You can't turn the blackboard upside down." "No, I guess you're right," said John. "I know I'm right," said Mrs. Jewls. "You're going to have to learn to stand on your head." John couldn't stand on his head. He had given up trying. You would have too if you had fallen over as many times as he had. Joe was John's best friend. He could stand on John's head. Every time John fell over, Joe stood on his head. After all, what are best friends for? "My head is too round, Mrs. Jewls. I can't stand on it," said John. "Of course you can, John," said Mrs. Jewls. "If Joe can stand on your head, so can you." "It's easy, John," said Joe. "I can't," John repeated. "I always fall over." "Nonsense," said Mrs. Jewls. "All you have to do is find your center of balance. Now up you go." John put his round head on the floor and swung his legs up. He fell right over. Then Joe stood on John's head. "See, John, it's easy. Nothing to it," Joe said. "We'll help you, John," said Mrs. Jewls. "Joe, get off of John's head and get me the pillow from under my desk. Nancy, Calvin, come here and give us a hand." Mrs. Jewls took the pillow from Joe and set it on the floor. "All right, John, we'll surround you," she said. "We won't let you fall." John put his head on the pillow and swung his legs up. He started to fall one way, but Nancy pushed him back up. Then he started to fall another way, but Calvin straightened him out. John kept falling a little bit this way and that way until at last he found his center of balance. "Hey, look at me," said John. "I'm up. I'm really up. I'm standing on my head. I found my center of balance. It's beautiful. I can read the chalkboard. Hey, Calvin, bring me a book, and you don't have to turn it upside down. Ha! Hey, who? Ah!" While Calvin went to get the book, John fell flat on his face. "You better stay off my head, Joe," he warned. "Are you all right, John?" asked Mrs. Jules. "Yes, I think so. I feel a little funny." "Hey, I can still read the blackboard, and I'm not upside down. I can read right side up now. When I fell, I must have flipped my brain or something." "That is wonderful, John," said Mrs. Jules. "Here, put the pillow back under my desk. As a reward, you may have a Tootsie Roll Pop. They're in the coffee can on top of my desk." John placed the pillow on top of her desk. Then he looked under the desk, but he couldn't find the Tootsie Roll Pops anywhere. Chapter 18, Leslie. Leslie had 5 fingers on each hand and 5 toes on each foot. For each hand she had an arm, and for each foot she had a leg. She was a very lucky girl. And she had 2 lovely, long brown pigtails that reached all the way down to her waist. When Mrs. Jules asked a question, Leslie would raise one of her hands. When Leslie was adding, she could count on her fingers. When Paul pulled one of her pigtails, she could kick him with one foot while standing on the other. But Leslie had one problem. She didn't know what to do with her toes. She had 10 adorable little toes and nothing to do with them. As far as she could tell, they served no useful purpose. "Suck your toes, that's what I do," said Sherry. But Leslie's foot wouldn't reach her mouth. "Well, that's all my toes are good for," said Sherry. She put her foot in her mouth and went to sleep. No, thought Leslie, they must be good for something. They just have to be. During recess, she asked Dana, "Dana, what do you do with your toes?" "I scratch the back of my legs," said Dana. "First, I scratch my left leg with my right foot, then I scratch my right leg with my left foot." "But my legs don't itch," said Leslie. "That's good," said Dana. "In that case, you can scratch my legs. With your help, I can scratch both legs at the same time." "No, never mind," said Leslie. She walked up behind Louis, the yard teacher, and hopped on his shoulders. "Louis," said Leslie, "I don't know what to do with my toes." Louis tugged her foot. "Yes, that is a serious problem," he said. "But I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take them off your hands for you, or rather your feet. Just cut them off and give them to me." "What?" asked Leslie. "You don't want them, so I'll take them," said Louis. "You won't have to worry about them ever again." "No," said Leslie. "I'll give them to Miss Mush," said Louis. "She can make little hot dogs out of them." Miss Mush was the lunch teacher. "No, I'm not going to give my toes away," said Leslie. "All right," said Louis. "I'll give you a nickel apiece for them." "No, you can't have them," said Leslie. "Why not?" Louis asked. "They're no good to you, anyhow. And think of all you can buy for 50 cents. The bell rang. "I'll think it over," said Leslie. She ran back to class. "Mrs. Jules," said Leslie, "I don't see any reason for keeping my toes." "Oh, Leslie, I'm sure there are lots of good reasons," said Mrs. Jules. "Well, I can't think of any. My legs don't itch, and I can't get my foot in my mouth. Louis offered me a nickel apiece for them, and it seems like a good deal. But I wanted to check with you first." "I think Louis was pulling your legs," said Mrs. Jules. "No," said Leslie, "he was pulling my toes." "What would he want with your toes?" asked Mrs. Jules. "I don't know," said Leslie, "but if he's willing to give me 5 cents apiece for them, then I'm going to take him up on it. That's 50 cents. At lunch, Leslie walked up to Louis. "Okay, Louis," she said, "you can have my toes for a nickel apiece. That'll be 50 cents. "Not so fast," said Louis. "Let me look at 'em first." Leslie took off her shoes. Yes, said Louis. "The big ones are good, and the ones next to them. But the most I'll give you for the rest of your toes is 3 cents each." Leslie was furious. 3 cents each? You told me 5 at recess." "I'll give you 5 cents for the big ones. But just look at that scrawny little runt of a toe on the end there. You're lucky to be getting even 3 cents for it. I think you're getting a darn good deal." "I happen to like that toe," said Leslie. "Fine then," said Louis. "Keep it. I'll just take the 2 big toes and we'll call it square." He reached in his pocket and pulled out a dime. "Nothing doing," said Leslie. "These toes are sold as a set. It's either all 10 for 50 cents or no deal. What am I going to do with just 8 toes?" "Then forget it," said Louis. "I'm not going to give you a nickel for those scrawny little ones." Fine, said Leslie. No deal. My toes will still be here if you change your mind. She turned and walked toward the hopscotch area. Wait a second, Louis called. I'll give you $1 each for your pigtails. Leslie turned around and looked at him with fiery eyes. Cut my hair? She exclaimed. Are you crazy?